Welcome to Season 2 of Garth and Sue Talk, a series by Psych Sessions where we bring up a topic of conversation and then we just riff. These are the water cooler conversations that you have with colleagues in your department. These are the chats you might have at the bar after a good day at a teaching conference. So please, pull up a seat as we talk about teaching.
This meeting's being recorded. This meeting's being recorded.
This meeting is being recorded.
Not the other one.
Not the other one. This one.
This one. Oh, boy. Sue, I may mess this whole thing up. And this is one of those things where I sent you a text a while ago and I said, have you heard of this? Or maybe have you used this or something like that? And you sent me a text back. You probably don't even remember this, but you sent me a text back and said no. And I said, I think you're going to like this conversation. And so I'm going to bring something, this grading technique that you've heard of before. I guess it's a course design and grading kind of technique, and try to talk about it with you. And what I'm hoping that we can do today is model what it's like to talk through, a new practice that you're not very confident in, and mostly to see kind of the holes in it, and to see how it works and how it might not work. And what I'm talking about is specifications grading. And I just recently talked to Linda Nilsson, who literally wrote the book on it. And we're going to put that out as a Psych Sessions full episode. I don't know if it's going to come out before or after. But what happened was I had heard about this contract grading, specifications grading, I don't know, within the last year somewhere. And then I think Marianne Lloyd, or was it Anna Ropp, interviewed somebody on Psych Sessions who was doing like research on specifications grading, and I thought, oh, that's really interesting, but it didn't strike me yet. So I remember you saying you needed to hear Eric Landrum talk about something like 7 times before you got it. Okay, so this is my story of this happening. It's like specifications grading was tapping me on the shoulder multiple times in 2020, and then somebody on my campus was talking about it, and finally I was like, forget it, I'm going to read the book. So I read the book over the winter break. It was a good read. I really liked it. I couldn't stop thinking about my courses while I was reading it. And I thought, I'd like to talk to Sue about it. So I don't want to put you on the spot about specifications grading, but, have you heard of it? Anything?
You mentioned contract grading as a synonym for specifications grading, and contract grading I have heard. So I'm going to guess that specifications grading, and I hope that it's abbreviated to spec grading. Yeah. Good. Then let's just call it that. That spec grading is very similar. So is it where, I'm going to go ahead and put myself on a limb here.
Okay.
Is it where you essentially tell students you need to reach a certain level of proficiency with this amount of content to earn this grade? If you reach this level of competency with this other content, or you up your game a little bit, then it's this grade. So you're grading for a bar instead of you just lost 30 points.
Yes, and you're correct. And
Let's just stop there. Let's just stop right there. I like that part where
all right,
I'm correct.
episode 4 or 5 or whatever this is. We're done. Thanks.
In the book.
I didn't realize that specs grading. Thank you for shortening that for me. Specs grading is often synonymous because there's some overlap with contract grading, but it's actually different because in contract grading, apparently historically, the students are the ones who come up with the contract, and then the professors or instructors sign off on it. Whereas in spec grading, you're really designing your course around these around the criteria that need to be met. So there is so much to it, and I want to tell you what I thought was kind of neat about it. It claims, and by the way, when I talked to Linda Nilsson, she claims all kinds of just all kinds of satisfaction by using specifications grading. Not only does she claim that it makes teacher or instructor workload decrease. For example, you never find yourself, I think she'd say never. You never find yourself in that gray area of, should I give the points here? Oh, they got some of those points. So partial credit is gone. Okay. Which I kind of like. Also, it forces faculty to write their assignments in such a way, and we've talked about being transparent and like tilting things in such a way that your students know exactly what to do and what is required of them to do it. Now, you were right in saying that, for let's talk A, B, C, F, whatever, that there are kind of different ways to do this, but one of the models is if you are, aiming for a C, these are the activities. If you're aiming for a B, do all of these things plus this, and A is all of the B, C things, and then plus the A things. But there's another way to do it too. And she used this metaphor, and the metaphor was hurdles. Great metaphor. She said, you can increase your course workload for some of those students by either adding more hurdles, so more things to do, or raising the existing hurdles up so that they're more sophisticated. Okay, I'm going to stop there. What do you think about any of this? You like it?
I'm intrigued, especially in combination with inner teaching, how you and I do it, where students are writing responses to these essay questions in advance, revising them, submitting them. I've toyed around with the idea, I guess, of spec grading but thinking of it as contract grading, just thinking I'm going to create the contract.
Yep.
But I haven't gotten any farther than, that's an intriguing idea.
Right, because I'm thinking, when I consider it, that it's going to take some work to really put this in across my entire curriculum if I'm going to do it that way. And I don't think you have to do it, but that's the way I would do it. But yeah, so it's a commitment for sure. It seems like to me.
Yeah. And as with most things, the devil is in the details. So the students answer the 10 questions that we have for chapter 1, and they don't quite reach the bar on all 10 questions, on 8 of the questions. So they have to go back and redo it. How much feedback do they get in redoing it? And in the meantime, they need to start working on chapter 2. Okay,
so here's where I would, because I've done some thinking about this.
Great.
Here's the clarification for that scenario is that, and this is one of her promises for spec grading, is that very early on, your students get a 0 on that. When they don't meet your criteria, they get that 0 and they say, holy cow, I got a 0 on this. This teacher isn't fooling around. And the claim is that it's going to increase the quality of students' work. The students who are like, what it gets rid of is partial credit. Like, I'll turn in garbage and I'll get some points for it. She also links that problem, or maybe like the learning problem and assessing outcomes. She really calls that out as a main way to use specifications grading because, okay, so if I don't want to get into the weeds too much and maybe I don't understand what I'm talking about, but if a student gets a B in the class, what does that mean for the outcomes exactly? Does that mean that they got all of the outcomes at about, 80%? Or does it mean that they mastered 4 of them completely and a few of them not at all? And so there's this inherent kind of problem in there. Now, back to this initial assignment, I think there's a lot of ways to do it, but the way I was thinking for our initial questions that students are answering would be, if you don't hit the criteria, which are, I've got these 10 questions that you're going to answer. They need to be this word length. They need to be personally reflected upon when that's asked, critical thinking, whatever those things are. And maybe even more defined than just critical thinking, but something pretty defined. If students aren't hitting that, that's a 0. And yeah, so no partial points. Does that work?
And then what?
Okay, so if the students take a 0, this is the part I struggled with, but I think I'm accepting it. In fact, I've integrated this into one of my courses. Sue, you turn in something and you didn't hit the word count. It's like you didn't pay attention to my directions. And so I send it back and I say, or I give you the 0 and I say, please meet all the specifications for the assignment. Something like that. And you say, I feel so ripped off. I did most of this. And you let me know. And I say, well, actually, Sue, if you want to use one of your tokens, you get 2 this quarter. So if you want to use one of your tokens, you can resubmit the assignment. I'll regrade it for you. I didn't want to call them tokens. In the one class I'm using it for this term, I called them whoops. You can use one of you can you can use a whoops. So yeah. So
I'm sorry that you didn't call it a whoopsie. That would be much more whimsical.
Next, there's always room for improvement.
There you go.
Okay, so I actually think that this is pretty much what I'm doing with my initial questions and answers for students. At this point, I was kind of doing spec grading. I left that on this particular assignment. I left that partial points out a little while ago, and I really like it. And as you do, kind of look through and see if the students are doing what they're supposed to be doing. And if they do, they get the credit. Is that what you're doing?
Yes. So there is the initial effort score, which is, did you really try? Does it look like you used some content from the book? And did you make a solid effort at answering every part of the question? Or did you just leave the whole thing blank? So if you leave the whole thing blank, you're not going to get any credit for the trying part. And then on the revision, I pick 2 of the questions and I score them for correctness. So students do get partial credit. But there's a lot of motivation to make sure that they've got all the answers as correct as they can be from their perspective, because they don't know which 2 of the 10 questions are going to be chosen for grading. So it seems like there's plenty of motivation already without the threat of the 0. And I wonder how much anxiety that may bring for students.
She has a whole section on anxiety, and I can't remember what she says now. But she is fairly transparent with, here are the main criticisms of it, and I want to respond to them. But I can't remember what she said about that. I do remember her saying that knowing how to earn the points for an assignment will actually decrease student anxiety, and I thought that was more of a criticism of instructors who are giving unclear, criteria or whatever. So that's a good point. Here's where okay, so let's talk Psych 100. Let's talk classical conditioning. And you and I like to both give applied questions to our students. So let's say we give them a scenario and we say, hey, identify the parts of classical conditioning and in your own words, just kind of explain how it works. The threat of 0, I feel like, is interesting in this situation because you and I both know what a right answer looks like. And it's almost in the feel more than the identification of these things. You just see that a student gets it, right? And so, that's full points explicitly, right? And then I think there's a student who, I think the student gets it. And when I'm reading it, I'm thinking they're struggling with it, but they're getting it. But at that point, if understanding classical conditioning is the outcome, and then you have to decide, does that student get it? And then what about everybody below who gets some aspects of it right and some aspects of it wrong? The question is, do they get it? Do they meet that outcome for that piece of content? What do you think?
I've thought about this quite a bit in the context of actually independent and dependent variables. Here's a description of an experiment, maybe an abstract from a journal article, identify the independent and dependent variables. And the student in a previous question was able to create, give them a hypothesis, they can create a very nice experiment based on that hypothesis, but their labeling of the independent and dependent variables are completely wrong. The labeling of the control condition and the experimental condition is completely wrong. So they get the concepts, they understand what a good design looks like.
Yeah.
But the labeling is completely wrong. And I wonder how often that happens with classical conditioning as well, that they get the concept, but when it comes to actually labeling it, that's where they whiff. And that's a whole different conversation about, well, how important is the labeling? Is understanding the experimental design, is understanding classical conditioning much more important than the labeling, and how often does the labeling actually trip up the students? So that's my long way of not answering your question.
No, well, the reason that's relevant is because spec grading turns the instructor has to hold up a mirror and say, how good are my questions? How good is my course design? How clear are my criteria if I'm going to hold students to this standard? Because I've been in that trap that you were just talking about with experiments as well. Maybe not often. I think there's but from time to time, right, where a student gets it and then they can't label it worth anything. And so you and I make judgment calls at that point, right? But I guess what is that? Because there are students who can do that all and really clearly get that. So are you making an argument for partial credit then?
I don't know what I'm making an argument for.
Yeah.
I guess it comes down to, well, what I spent quite a bit of time thinking about is ultimately what's most important. Is it really crucially important that a student be able to clearly identify an independent and dependent variable, be able to clearly identify the unconditioned stimulus versus the conditioned stimulus? If they can explain, here's how you set up an experiment, here's how classical conditioning works, but the labeling is just not all there. And I think I really struggle with that, because I think of it almost like a multiple choice mentality for me. For so long, I had these multiple choice questions where I asked students, here's an example, identify the independent variable, and here are your 4 possibilities for that. Here's a classical conditioning example, identify the unconditioned stimulus, and here are your possibilities for that. Or here's X, is this an unconditioned stimulus, conditioned stimulus, whatever. And I think sometimes we get so caught up in the terminology that we forget about the bigger picture. So how important is the terminology compared to the bigger picture? And now is a good time to reiterate that for the psychology majors, we're not worried about them, because they're going to go on and they're going to take a research methods class.
Yeah.
They're going to go on, maybe they're going to take a learning class. And none of those upper level courses assume that the student remembers anything. You and I both teach research methods, and we start back with, here's an independent and here's a dependent variable. Yeah. We don't assume that students remember that from intro, assuming that they ever understood it to begin with.
Yeah.
So just to reiterate, we're not talking about the psychology majors. We're talking about the people who are going to be going into medicine and engineering or whatever. Is it really that important that they can say, yep, that's an independent variable right there? Probably not.
Yes. And I will say spec grading, one of the questions I had, does it work at upper level classes? And it does. And there's tons of examples in the book about that. But I think the question this brings up, this is an important one for us, is what kinds of things are we assessing at the intro psych level? And anybody can apply that to any class. What kinds of things are we assessing at the research methods level? Let me take this in a bit of a different direction. One of the things that I was kind of concerned about is that the threshold for passing, for getting that A or that B, is not terribly high. I mean, you don't have to be the 4.0 student to get the A in the class. It's very interesting. You have to pass this threshold of where I think you've learned or you've met the outcome. And I thought, well, how are we going to tell the 4.0 students from the 3.0 students? And that's not a question that specs grading is concerned with. They're concerned with, did you achieve the outcome? So I don't know.
So is it really tied specifically to the student learning outcomes for the course, or are they more specific outcomes for each assignment or each chapter?
That's a great question. And honestly, on a first read through, I was thinking through that, and I need this is the problem, right? Is that you actually need to sit down with this for like a couple of days and really pull your outcomes apart and see how this all fits. Yes, I think it does speak to the outcomes of a course. But when you embrace this way of doing things, I think it'll also probably bring into question some of the outcomes for your course and whether they're appropriate.
Yeah, no doubt. I could totally see that. I'm thinking about the APA, IPA, APA, IPI.
It was IPA for a minute. It was. Oh no, you know what? The big conference rollout was going to be the intro psych assembly or something like that. Okay, you're thinking about the IPA. Yes, go ahead.
The IPA, the APA, IPI, the intro psych initiative, student learning outcomes, and thinking, and so those are course level, obviously. The themes are the ones that I'm going to be most interested in terms of the course. Can students apply these themes? Can they see these themes as they run through the course? And I know that those haven't been firmly set in stone quite yet. They're more like gently etched into sandstone, but the whole thing can be sanded and revised. So they're pretty close to being in granite, but we're not quite there yet. Mm-hmm. So, but anyway, and so in thinking about these themes, I've been spending some time thinking about how I'm going to incorporate them into our course. And I know that you and I are planning on doing a series of podcasts on those themes. And I'm really looking forward to that, because right now, as I try to think how to bring them into the course, it's really trying to wedge them into my existing content. Mm-hmm. But I wonder about stepping back, completely redesigning the course so that those themes that run throughout the entire course are really front and center. Mm. And if so, then I could totally see where the spec grading could really fit with that. Can the student see that here are all the different factors that influence who we are, that it is culture and past experience and biology, etc. So
yeah, I told you this was going to be a kind of a messy conversation, because I think when you logically kind of go down this path, it does bring things up like this where, well, is the way I'm teaching my course, which is, I bounce around my textbook in some ways. I kind of put my course together according to the pillar model, APA's pillar model. But does it now need to be kind of ripped apart and organized into 7 themes? And is that going to be the best way to serve students who take an intro to psych course? Yeah, it's a good one. And does that make it a little easier? Or from a spec grading perspective, if I want students to understand that there are biopsychosocial factors, and I don't know how that exact outcome is worded, but if there's biopsychosocial factors that determine human behavior and thought processes, what is the threshold for that particular outcome? How do I know when a student can do that versus cannot do that? And then now we're talking complete course design, because now we're talking about your assessment has to do that. Your outcome has to be clear. You have to come up with the criteria. You have to assess whether the students have met that criteria. What I love about it, though, is that you can take like that out, that student learning outcome, that integrative theme. You can design an assignment around it, ask students to do very, very particular things. And if they do them, there is no black and white. They get the points, they get the grade for it. I really like that.
I can envision a course. Imagine a world where I can envision a course built around, especially those 7 integrative themes as they currently sit, so that each chapter, we don't worry so much about, do students understand how a neuron works? Do they get the action potential? It's not so much that. It's, let's zoom out, tell the students, here are these 7 themes that cut across the course. and I really like these 7 themes. If students at the end of an intro psych course have a solid understanding of these 7 themes, I'm going to be really happy about it. They may not be able to label correctly independent and dependent variable, but if they have these bigger picture ideas of what psychology is, then I'm going to be ecstatic. So if that's really true, if that's really what's going to make me so happy, then I can envision giving students, here are the 7 themes. Here is chapter 2. Read chapter 2 and write about each of those 7 themes as they show up in chapter 2.
Yeah.
Now let's go on to chapter 3, repeat. Mm-hmm. So the students are actually pulling out the content. They're reading not to memorize a particular definition, but instead they're reading for the bigger picture. So any student who could reach that bar, wherever that bar is, for each of those 7 themes in each chapter, I would have no problem awarding a student an A grade in that course.
Yeah. Which is, let me just put this out there, which is probably easier to award than it is, I think the question in the traditional course, how many pieces of content does a student have to master for the A? You know what I'm saying? And disconnected content. Yeah, that's kind of the alternative, the traditional model.
Right. And how many licks does it take to get to the center of a Tootsie Pop?
Well, and to go back to spec rating, this is one of her critiques, is what do our outcomes mean? What do they mean? Or what does a letter grade mean? I should say, more so. Yeah. I don't know that, I feel like I should go listen to that pod. Like I should know somebody and get access to that podcast before it's released to the general public. Because I guess my question would be, I guess I don't know what the grade means inside of spec grading unless you have a copy of the course syllabus. 100%. I think that's all assumed in a good spec rating course, is that you do have the syllabus in. And so part of this conversation, I hear what you're saying is, it's hard for us to actually have a grounded conversation without talking about something specific. Yeah. So, but anyway, I think that the book is a fairly quick read. It's super applied. So it gives lots of examples. One of the things I really liked about it was that when people have done this hard work and thought through it and put it into their courses, the assignments are unbelievably clear. The syllabus instructions or the syllabus information is unbelievably clear. I went back into my course and I thought, well, what the hell am I doing here? I've got like pages of instructions for this assignment, why can't it be clearer? So if nothing else, that alone will benefit my students. So it was worth it. But even after a conversation with her, I've got to say, I'm not completely clear about everything yet. So maybe somebody out there who's hearing this will want to come talk to us about how they did it in their course. That'd be kind of fun.
That'd be a lot of fun. We could totally grill them. I would absolutely love to hear how they've done it.
Yeah, totally. Well, hey, we keep teasing people about this integrative theme stuff, but I'm thinking that might be our third season. I don't know. What do I know? I don't know anything, Sue.
No, we're making this all up as we go along.
Yeah. Yeah. So did you learn anything in our conversation that is anything kind of compelling to you that you think you'll think about after this conversation?
Well, I think the first thing I'm going to do is get a copy of the book and spend some time thinking about it, especially in the context of the integrative themes.
Yeah.
I think getting there from an inner teaching model is going to be easier than for someone going to it from a multiple choice 4 tests a term model, frankly.
Yep.
But I guess I feel like I need to read the book.
Yeah.
And spend some time with that and wonder if it's going to give me anything above and beyond what it is I'm currently doing. But if I am going to really make the switch and make the integrative themes really an integral part of the course, a central focus of the course, if I'm going to go to all that trouble, I might as well think about it in terms of, is there different ways of grading it? Yeah.
Yeah. And if her claims are right, and she leads so strongly with this. So I think maybe she took a marketing course at some point, but the promise is huge. The promise is you are not going to be sitting there with a student paper mulling painfully for 5 minutes. Do I give them the points or not here? I don't know what to do in this situation because of the clarity of what you're looking for in as to whether the student gets it or not. In fact, you look confused, Sue. Hold on, we're not done then. I'm going to tell you about, because I was like that, and then I thought about the AP reading, which we have to talk about still. But I thought about the way we graded the AP reading. There is this black and white, the 0-1 that happens. And that's what she says spec grading does for you. What do you think?
And I would argue that a really good rubric does that.
Yeah.
So I don't think it solves the problem. I think it's great that it solved the problem for her, but I'm not entirely convinced it's going to solve the problem for me. I think it just shifts the problem from, does the student get this point, yes or no, versus did the student meet it or did not meet standard. Mm-hmm. So a decision still has to be made. It's still a yes-no decision.
Yeah. So what if you asked a different question? Okay. So I can think about some of my questions that could lead me to a gray area of, does this student get it or not? But I also think maybe I could change the question so that it was more, and then you're going to say to me, well, you don't need to do spec grading for that. Okay. Okay. Yeah. All right. So anyway, read the book. It's if nothing else, it's a challenge to, or it's, I don't want to say it's just a challenge. It's energizing to read something like that and think about how your course lines up to it. I agree with you. Interteaching, it fit really nicely. When I was thinking through it, I was finding like intersections all over the place where spec grading could work nicely with it. And mostly I was just challenged as a teacher to be a better teacher. So that's always a good result of a book, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I'm definitely down for reading it.
All right. Well, and the last thing I'll just say is that when you talk about these 7 integrative themes and kind of building a course around it, man, that'd be fun. I don't know if you want to do that in a vacuum by yourself, but it'd be fun to do it together or get some people to start thinking through what would a course look like organized around, like purely organized around these themes, not trying, because it's so out of the box. You agree, right?
I totally agree.
Yeah. Like, I'm not trying to say squeeze this new model into your existing model. I'm like, what if you blew the whole thing up and you've got these 7 integrated themes, probably plus, there's 2 other outcomes before that integrative theme outcome, and those are important too. But what would it look like to build that around? And I'll tell you one other thing I was thinking when you were mentioning that is I have an e-textbook through the textbook that I use, and what they allow you to do is to select modules with checkboxes that you want to bring into the reading for that week for your students. That kind of technology could be really key in doing something like this, because I might not have students go chapter by chapter, which is an option, what you said, but I could have students also, I could create these customized modules so if we are going to talk about biopsychosocial, I could bring in the content from different chapters which might be too disjointed, but I don't know. There's lots of ways to do it.
I think it would be, as textbooks are currently written now, I think it would be disjointed. You
need a textbook written according to the themes, wouldn't you? Yeah.
I think that you would if you were going to bring it in piecemeal like that.
Yeah.
I think that it could work with a standard textbook if you put the work on students to pull the themes out.
Yeah.
But it's got to be a well-written textbook. And it may be that it would be quite a task for students to pull all 7 themes out, but perhaps 5 themes per chapter.
Yeah. Well, and then you kind of hit all 7, but maybe only 5 at a time or something like that, right? And
right.
And now what are you doing? You're doing spaced practice. You're doing retrieval practice. If you do something like that, students getting multiple exposures to them. Yeah, it's a great idea. All right, Sue, thanks for chatting with me about spec grading.
Always a pleasure, Garth. Not just talking about spec grading, but anytime we chat, it's always well, except for that one time. That one time was not a pleasure, but all other times it's totally a pleasure.